Hello, folks, and welcome back to the program. This is Chris, live in central Pennsylvania. I have a special guest today. I'm going to talk about his recent op-ed. When I say recent, I believe it's yesterday. It appeared in News 24, and it's none other than the chairperson of the Solidarity Movement, Flip Bison. I hope I pronounced his surname correctly. I don't want to butcher that. Yeah. So Flip, welcome back to the program.
Thank you very much.
You're very welcome. I want to say back, we've never done this before, but I have interviewed you when Afriform and Solidarity came to the States. We met at a Starbucks halfway between DC and my house. So welcome back to the program. It's a pleasure to have you here.
No, thank you very much. It's a privilege to be here.
All right. Well, look, Flip, sometimes when I speak to Afrikaners, they say they speak English in self-defense. I think your English is pretty good. So you speak English deliciously, I understand. So we're going to be okay.
I will try my best. I wish I could. There's a saying in South Africa, the official language of South Africa is bad English.
Well, yeah, because almost nobody actually speaks it. Only 6% of South Africans speak it as a first language. So I would not disagree with that. That's a fair statement. And the problem with bad English is it becomes English. That's the problem. Because the language is very flexible, and it becomes like when Indians have a different English than South Africans, than Americans, than Irish, than Brits. We all have our own versions of English. And unfortunately for the Brits, the American version is the correct version. So we'll go with that.
Was it Churchill who have said that Britain and the United States are two great nations divided by one common language?
That is correct. And it was so true, and it remains true today. Look, I mean, South Africa, this one's one that still beggars the imagination. I mean, we call it in the United Kingdom, in Ireland, in Hong Kong, in Australia, in New Zealand, in Canada, US, a traffic light. But for some reason, South Africans call it a robot. The first time I actually saw that, I was driving Johannesburg like 25, 30 years ago, something like that. And painted on the street in front of me said, robot ahead. And I'm like, R2-D2? Anyway, kind of threw me off. I didn't know the usage. All right, well, Flip, that's lovely, but people are here to talk about your op-ed that was in News 24, in which they titled this thing, basically what I've kind of used here is, traitors or patriots, treason or patriotism. And this all stems, of course, from MK and EFF laying charges against Solidarity and Afriform, accusing them erroneously, maliciously is a better term, I think, of committing treason, when in fact, as I've covered, from my perspective, those two organizations, which are in the same umbrella, those two organizations have gone out of their way to try to convince American officials not to punish South Africa. So with that lead off, let me go ahead and give you the floor to you and just tell people a little bit about the op-ed and how it came about, because I printed it out, and much to my chagrin, it's actually 8 pages long. It didn't seem that long when I read it, but it's quite a lengthy op-ed. And I think very detailed and pretty accurate. But let me just give you a chance to explain how the op-ed came about and how it got there.
As you know, in March earlier this year, we visited United States, delegation from the Solidarity Movement, consisting of Afriform and Solidarity, the union. So we visited Washington, and we had several high-level meetings there. And to our surprise, we were charged with high treason back in South Africa, first by two, extremist political parties. But very soon it became clear that the government itself, the ANC, support that kind of, charges against us. And so they said that a special unit of the police crimes against the state, they call themselves CATS, they started to investigate the case, and that complaint or the charge was repeated by several high-level government leaders. And so about 2 weeks ago, in Parliament, there was a question about what happened to the charge, and the responsible minister said that they are still busy with the investigation, for high treason. Now, of course, there's no legal basis for that, but there's a political basis for that. The ANC want to intimidate us. They want to make an example, of us. Perhaps we don't know what, because the police, in cases of high treason, they have very, very wide powers. And yeah, you never know what will happen. The problem is, however, that several journalists, basically pro-ANC journalists have taken up that whole idea of that we are, traitors. And so Mr. Adrian Basson, the editor of News 24, it's a very large, perhaps I think it can be the biggest news website in the country. So and they also accused us of treason, and said that the basically underlying narrative it is that the whole issue between South Africa and the United States, the tariffs, the job losses in South Africa, the statements of Mr. Trump, everything is our fault, because we have spread misinformation about South Africa. So they, in fact, they basically deny that there's anything wrong with government policy. Of course, publications like News 24, they criticize the government, but they criticize corruption, and they said that the policies are not carried out correctly and so on, but they never question the underlying ideology, the revolutionary ideology of the ANC, the whole idea of the national democratic so-called revolution and so on. So they never criticize that kind of policies, the race policies. When we said that the expropriation without compensation, the new act is very dangerous, they accuse us of fear-mongering in order to get more support and so on. And we've said that the act is not constitutional, and we showed that there's a lot of problems with the act, and they denied that. They support the ANC government and accuse us, like I said, of racism and treason and all that. And 2 weeks ago, Mr. Ramaphosa had to admit that some parts of the act are unconstitutional. And of course, he limited that to a single clause or two. We see it much broader. We strictly believe in property rights. So my response was that basically we are Democrats, and we see the right to criticize and free speech as basic ingredients of democracy. And if you criticize the government, you are not a traitor. You are a patriot. If the government are on the wrong road, on the road to Zimbabwe or Venezuela, you are basically exercising your patriotic duty to criticize, the government in order to stop our country from sliding, the Zimbabwe way and so on, because we have seen what expropriation without compensation did to Zimbabwe. I mean, millions of the citizens are now in South Africa trying to make a living because they've destroyed the economy of Zimbabwe. I mean, they've destroyed their monetary system. They've destroyed their infrastructure. Their civil servants do not get regular salaries, etc., etc. So we see ourselves as, as patriots and definitely not as traitors.
Well, that's fair. And in fact, on the issue about Zimbabwe, in fact, there's so many Zimbabweans out of the country that UK is now the largest source of remittances to Zimbabwe, no longer South Africa, despite the fact there are approximately 2.5, 3 million Zimbabweans living in South Africa, many of them working and sending money home. Now the UK is the largest single source of remittances. But you talk about CATS there, the combating, it's the action against the state. That task force seems to be in place. The political killings task force seems to have gone away, but this one's still there. But that's an organization that goes after terror groups like the Boeremag, who commit treason. And also they, I believe, are still investigating the July 2021 insurrection took place in KZN, which is still unfolding. Yeah. And they've been sicked on your organization, which is a labor movement and an umbrella organization with civil rights groups and things. It's in some ways, I guess you'd have to say, ironic, but not surprising.
Yeah, you're totally correct. It is ironic, but not surprising. The ANC fundamentally, we sit with a cabinet that call each other comrades. They're still in a formal alliance with the Communist Party. They have socialist policies, and they can't govern. I mean, the outcome after more than 30 years of ANC government shows that clearly that they can't govern a modern country, but they want to control everything. They want to control the schools, the state, the electricity supply. They want to control everything, but they can't manage. They can't govern, and you see that. Let's look at figures of the unemployment rate. We have most sources say South Africa has the highest unemployment in the world. It's double the number of people who was employed when the ANC took power in 1994. But the whole idea of centralization, the whole idea of control, the whole idea of that they don't see you as opponents, political opponents. They see you as an enemy of the state. And there's a very big difference between when you are an opponent of a political party that is busy to running the country in the ground on the one side and the enemy of the state on the other side, So that is very dangerous talk of the ANC. And let's hope that they are not totally serious with that.
Well, Flip, let me just break in with a bit of breaking news here. One of my viewers said something earlier about Italy is now withdrawn from the G20. I predicted that was potentially going to happen. I can't confirm that yet, in no small measure, because the media has failed to report at this point. It may have just happened, if it's true. Also, the one place you can get true breaking news, apparently either X is under attack or it's got some sort of major service failure, because I can't access it on my mobile phone or on my browsers online. I get an error message when I go to the site. So there is potentially something wrong with X, at least here in the U.S. So I can't confirm whether that's true or not. But you said something in your op-ed is something I've been saying for a long time. South Africa is a sovereign country, and it's entitled to its own foreign policy and domestic policy, as long as its domestic policy doesn't commit international violations. But policy decisions come with consequences, and South Africa has been insulting the United States repeatedly. Its leaders calling Trump a white supremacist, Ibrahim Rasool, and now this week on CNN we have Ronnie Lamola calling Donald Trump a white supremacist and America a white supremacist. I mean, there are consequences to this. The Lady R incident, the 75% tariffs against our poultry, the quota limitation on shipping American cars into South Africa, but Chinese cars are coming in by the flood-like. And then in addition to that, we've also got lots of other artificial barriers that are put in place. They ban our pork products. And we've given South Africa duty-free access to our marketplace for when you put the GATT in there, which is still around, but it's not called that anymore. It's General Agreement on Trade and Tariffs, which is under the World Trade Organization. When you put all that together, over 5,000 separate product lines and services came into the U.S. for over 20 years duty-free. And we gave South Africa $8.1 billion to fight HIV when Thabo Mbeki was living with AIDS denialism. South Africa refused to sign Article 98 waiver for the International Criminal Court, the Rome Statute, which put our soldiers at risk when they came there for exercises. They've been very unfriendly. Cyril Ramaphosa ran around and screamed vaccine apartheid when the United States and the European Union gave Aspen Pharmacare $711 million to manufacture a vaccine, yet he still ran around with that racist narrative. I mean, at some point, these insults and these slights, and that's just a brief smattering of them. I mean, there are consequences to your actions, and South Africa can be as sovereign as it wants, but the U.S. shouldn't have to sit by and just take this abuse.
Yeah, I think the ANC, they're used to the price of the world. They saw themselves in, and I can use their own words, as a moral superpower. And so they are used to have the support of the whole world, especially the West. They used to be the darling of the West. And now suddenly, for them, it has changed, with the Trump administration, but even before that. So with the corruption, with the mismanagement of the country, with the socialist policies, with their international relations, they vote against one of the top 10 countries that regularly vote against the United States in the UN and so on. But at the same time, they want money from the US. They want duty-free access. They don't, so they want favors from the US, but they are insulting the US the whole time. And and now the country have to live with the consequences of what the ANC, try to do. Then they make enemies of the United States, the biggest superpower in the world. And what we have said in our message to the people we have met in Washington and so on, we have said to them, please don't punish the country for the misdeeds of the ANC. Rather act against the ANC and not the country. But I think the problem was that the ANC have alienated so much. They've alienated many influential people in the United States and also in the rest of the world, even in Africa, because they saw themselves kind of untouchable. And like I said, now the country have to live with the consequences.
Well, it's a bit shocking to me in some respects there, Flip, because I know that other South African organizations come to the U.S. frequently and they're never attacked for this. Like COSATU sends delegations here, the Congress of South African Trade Unions. And in fact, I think about a year and a half ago, they were a bit taken aback. The COSATU has traditionally been able to rely on Democratic members of the House and Senate to support pretty much anything, any position. And they came here and the Democrats were amongst the loudest accusing South Africa of violating property rights and causing all these problems. Even if I understand correctly from a couple different sources, even the Congressional Black Caucus was a little bit upset with South Africa, not with COSATU, but with the ANC. And I think the problem is that the ANC either doesn't care or they can't read the room. They seem incapable of reading the room.
But not only that, I agree with you. They are incapable of reading the room, but you know what? They try to govern with an outdated ideology from the 1960s. They cling to a world that no longer exists. So they want to align themselves with countries like China, like Iran, like Venezuela, and all that countries that in many instances are opponents of the West. So they want help from the West, but they don't want really relations with the West. So the whole idea of BRICS, in 2010, South Africa joined BRICS because they thought of that as an alternative to the West, and they openly said they see the United States as a declining superpower. And so they have this narrative that the United States are a declining superpower and the future are in the East, and they want to align themselves, with countries that are traditionally, opposed to the West. So, but you must remember during the Cold War, the ANC was still a banned organization, but they were trained and financed by countries like the Soviet Union and China and Cuba and so on and so on. And they basically still in that mode. They've made concessions in order to get power in South Africa, but after they've consolidated their power, they fall back on their traditional policies and use the power of the state to carry out their original agenda. And the whole idea of they caused, they accused America of imperialism. The whole language, Cold War language, you regularly hear from the ANC and its leaders. So they really outdated party, outdated leaders, and really outdated ideas.
Well, 100% on that, Flip. You're not going to get any disagreement on that from me. I mean, this is a party that is much like the National Party. They love state-owned enterprises, which encroach on the private sector. I mean, look at the harm that South African Airways has done to the taxpayer and to the aviation market and to private businesses. And they're just an albatross around the neck of South Africa. It's unfortunately should have privatized a long time ago. Maybe it would have survived. Go ahead.
Yeah, but there's a reason for that. There's an ideological reason for that. They see the state as the breadwinner, not only as the housekeeper. So they see the state as a locomotive of the economy. And they use the Chinese model, or their version of the Chinese model. They believe that the state must manage the economy, and especially with the state-owned enterprises. They don't want to privatize that. And so they call it a developmental state, and they based that model on China. But there's huge differences between South Africa and China. And one of the differences is that they manage their public enterprises much more efficient than in South Africa. In South Africa, basically, over 700 state-owned enterprises, and basically everyone is bankrupt or need handouts or bailouts from the taxpayer. That is a problem.
Well, absolutely. No, they're insolvent. That's the bottom line here. They're not going concerns. They just suck money off the teat of the small tax-paying base and then interfere in the private sector and cause all kinds of chaos. But there's another aspect of this too, which I know you're familiar with, and that's for the audience, is that these enterprises, these activities are also patronage machines, places to put the connected friends who get big salaries and then destroy companies like Eskom and airports company South Africa, Transnet. The list goes on and on. It's really sad to see this. And you're right. It comes back to the point you made earlier, I believe, is that a failed ideology. These people are stuck in the 1960s, and it's almost the 2030s here. They really need to get out of this high-bound mode, because your future is not Cuba, your future is not Tehran, your future could be Beijing, but you're putting all your eggs in a basket with China is a bad move. China has lots of problems. I've been telling people this for 20 years, while Americans in the political circles I moved in at the national level freaking out about China and Africa. I'm like, okay, take a deep breath here. And shipping their inferior consumer goods and eventually their better quality goods to a market in Africa. They're very unfair traders, and China has a pollution problem. They have a demographic problem. They have a development problem. I mean, most of the country is within 50 miles of the shore. The rest of it's just, the 13th century once you get inland. Other than a few places like Wuhan. We know about Wuhan. But the point here is that hitching your horse solely to China is a mistake. China, a lot of the world is waking up to the fact that China is a predatory mercantilist state. I mean, China is the Dutch East India Company of 21st century. That's what it really is. It's a mercantilist economy.
Yeah, of course. It is a state, the state manages the economy. The Communist Party are firmly in power. But the ANC sees China as a very important role model for them.
So, Flip, of course, the solidarity movement includes solidarity of the trade union. So, obviously, labor is an important issue for folks. And you lobbied in the States to try to get U.S. politicians to be cognizant of the harm that the loss of AGOA would do to South Africa's agriculture sector, its automotive industry. And also, you're trying to help preserve jobs. But the 30% tariff that President Trump imposed, which went into effect on August 9th, so September, October, and November, we've now had 90 days of these tariffs. Initially, within 30 days, we heard a response from government that something like 40,000 jobs have been lost already. But everything has gone very quiet since then. Since you guys have a labor union under you, are you seeing the impacts of this in the industries where you have workers? Is it already hitting them?
It's already hitting them. You got retrenchment notices from many companies, and every one of the companies blame two things. The one is the state, basically the infrastructure of the country, the railways, the inefficient harbors, and so on. Companies can produce, but they must use the railway system and the harbors to export their products. And the railway system are very inefficient, and the harbors are very inefficient. I think South Africa's harbors was in a recently published list about at the bottom. So that is the biggest problem of the private sector is the state. Last night I was driving through a suburb of Johannesburg, and everything that the private sector are responsible for, the lights in front of the buildings, everything was working. But everything the state was responsible for, the robots, the roads, and so on, is in a mess. And that is the story of South Africa. The ANC tried to manage everything. They want to centralize power. They want to monopolize the services to the population, but in effect they can't do that. And the private sector had to step in, and the communities had to step in and provide that kind of services. So they cling to outdated ideologies, outdated alliances, and they alienate people in the West. But also they see us, they see Afrikaners as the proxies of the West, and they can. They can't do anything to Donald Trump, but they can attack us. They can make laws against us. They can govern against us because we are seen as a proxies, of the West. Even if they know that it is not in the interest of a country, even if they know that, if they can't manage the waterworks of a town, their own people haven't got water, but they will not accept help from us, from our members, from our branches, because of tenders, because of they don't want to be seen to work with with all respect, they don't want to work with whites. And that is a new phase of racism in South Africa. They rather let their people do not have clean water than to work with us, to accept our hand of friendship, because it is important for us on a local level, for example, in a small town. If people haven't got water and only Afrikaners in that town make a plan, have a pump or put up a water tank and so on, you get friction. So we believe it is in our interest that we help people to have access to clean drinking water and so on. But if you want to do that, you must do it without the help of the government, because they don't want anybody to help them if that person not belong to the ANC or of a certain color or political persuasion.
Well, and that's because, like I say here in the States, I foolishly ran for the state legislature last year, wasting my savings, but I didn't win. But I said in my race, I said, politics for so many people is about self-aggrandizement, self-enrichment, and naked political power. And that's what it seems to be about for the ANC. They could rather let South Africans go hungry, starve, live off sausage grants, rather than work with other South Africans. Rather than have a functioning ESCOM, they'll chase the Indian, colored, and white engineers and technicians out of the country, so they're forced to go abroad to France or Japan to work in the power industry, while South Africa has a dearth of qualified people, and the ones that are there can't work because they have the wrong skin pigmentation. But let me run through a list really quickly of some of the things you talked about before I get back to you. So you talked about kind of the infrastructure collapse, and you mentioned ports. South Africa is ranked 78th in the world amongst industrial states that have ports around the world. 78th, dead last, the worst performing ports in the world. So the argument that South Africa is a great place for ships to stop on the way around the Cape of Good Hope is nonsense. People simply bypass South Africa because it's too long, too much red tape, inefficient ports, and your cargo handling is pathetic. Not yours, but the country's. I've been seeing the railroads in Northwest where the communication lines have been stripped out for all the copper, and the overhead connection lines have been ripped off now. They've even stolen the rails and the ties. So the rails are shut down in a lot of the country. As a consequence, the road coming from Durban can't get things up country because the rails are overburdened or they're falling apart. Of course, we know the story about potholes over South Africa, no electricity. And if you want to invest in South Africa, you provide your own security or hire G4S or someone like that. You've got to provide your own transportation. You've got to replace trucks all the time because they're stolen, looted, or they're damaged on the roads. It's really a sad story. And, South Africa, when the ANC took over, only had a handful of people who were HIV positive. South Africa today leads the world in HIV infections with 8.5 million people. We've recently had cholera outbreaks in Hammanskraal, and now someone says something about typhus. I haven't confirmed that yet, but we've definitely had cholera in a country that never had it. And of course, the case of malaria spiked when the ANC stopped using DDT. Then the World Health Organization said, okay, let's go back to that. I mean, it's just such a sad thing. Over 500,000 cases of tuberculosis in the country, and schools are falling apart. It's really a sad story. I mean, I don't think the world really is paying attention to this, and I think it's to the detriment of South Africans, Flip.
Yeah, that is a problem. As many governments in the world, doesn't want to speak up on what's really happening in South Africa, and the ANC, they still promise their voters jobs. They promise their voters free services. Basically, they say to the people, vote for us. Vote for a living. And from a free market perspective, we say to the people, you must work for a living. But what is tragic is that their policies, the consequences of their policies, is that millions of people have lost their jobs, or jobs that were not created because of the problems you have mentioned. And when they lost their jobs because of the ANC, then they vote for the ANC because of the welfare benefits, But I mean, you have in effect, if you look at personal taxpayers, you have got 3 million people who pay more than 90% of the tax. And there's about 66 million people in South Africa. Now, you can't. I mean, it doesn't make sense. It is you can't have that situation where, according to the president of the country, Mr. Ramaphosa, 50% people live from the state. I mean, it means that they live from the productivity of 3 million taxpayers, and that is clearly not sustainable.
Well, not only is it not sustainable, I mean, it's just quite frankly morally bankrupt. That you would want to. I mean, the ANC's proud of it. In the State of the Nation address, President Ramaphosa cheers. Look, we've delivered 17 million SASA grants. He's proud of that. I mean, I would be embarrassed. I mean, the fact that 42 million Americans draw food stamps, I find embarrassing. It shouldn't be more than a fraction of the population. But to be fair, our government has made it so that if you make 400% of the poverty line, in other words, 4 times the income considered poverty, you can qualify for food stamps. That's insane. That's people shouldn't be getting food stamps. But still, I'm embarrassed that 42 million Americans are on food stamps out of 330 million Americans. But the ANC seems to be proud of that. They boast about it. It's pretty sad. But I want to shift to something here very quickly, if you don't mind. And this is specifically about the kind of the treason thing and the allegations of that nonsense. So it's interesting that News 24 published your op-ed, because it's the same organization that's had to apologize through the press ombudsman for misreporting or for misleading or what I would call yellow journalism about the solidarity movement and AfriForum. In fact, Adrien Basson likes to target your organization quite a bit. He's not the only one. George Clausen's also there doing things, as well as Peter Dutoit. But Basson seems to have a particular penchant for this. And he was talking, he brought up this old canard about the mine workers union over a century ago and how they tried to keep black workers out of the mines and such. And that's the antecedent roots, of course, the solidarity movement. But you made the point that, my words, not yours, let's not forget that Media 24, the empire and Koos Becker that he's part of, was part and parcel of the apartheid era and actually supported the government during the apartheid era. It's funny how they have collective loss of memory when it comes to that sort of thing. And also, unlike News 24, you've transformed this movement into something completely different. It's focused on Christian values and capitalism. Am I mistaken about any of that?
No, you are right. I must say that I believe that Naspers have also successfully transformed their organization. If you look at their investments in many other countries in the world, but the remnants of the policy of support the governing party, you can still see it in people like Adrien Basson's writings. They support the ANC. Like I said, of course they have to criticize them about corruption, because everybody's sick and tired of corruption in South Africa, black and white. But they do not criticize the policies that cause that corruption or that enable that corruption. So the legacy of supporting the governing party, is still with people like Basson. But from our side, they have a very selective memory, of the past. That is true.
And unlike other labor movements, now I know that Solidarity Movement is an umbrella organization. It's not just labor, but the Solidarity Unions in there. But unlike a lot of labor unions, I don't recall seeing any violent strikes or protests or threats against the state or against employers. Maybe I missed it. I mean, has Solidarity ever been involved in anything like that?
We've never been involved in any unlawful and violent strike or of vandalism or what. We are based on Christian values. We support the free market system. We strongly believe in the rule of law. We are very concerned about issues like, we try to help people with their work. We try to cooperate with employers in order to grow the economy. We really want to conserve the infrastructure in South Africa. We want to conserve the economy, and also we work for good racial relations in South Africa. It is very important. The good news in South Africa, there is still very good personal relations between people of different groups. On a horizontal level, very good relations. Politically, there's not good relations, because it is in the ANC's interest to try and change a country with many cultures in one with two races. And because if they the whole time focus on race, it improves their chances, with the next election, because there are more blacks than whites in the country. That is why they always focus on race. They try to turn South Africa in a kind of demographic, democracy, where everyone knows beforehand that who will win the election, because elections are racial census by and large. And the past few years, many of the blacks, traditional ANC supporters, they don't see any benefit from the ANC. They don't vote. They stay away from the polls in even greater numbers and so on. So the ANC have a crisis, and the problem we have and the concern we have is that if their power are threatened, they will become radicalized, and that is what happened in Zimbabwe and several other places. But the average black person in South Africa are not revolutionary. In fact, we sit with a broadly conservative population with a liberal constitution and a left-wing government. That is the biggest problem of the country.
Yeah, that is the irony, is that most South Africans are conservative in their focus in life. They're people of faith, whether they're Christians, Muslims, or Jews. They simply want to raise their family, they want to get along with other people, and they want to have their children, their progeny do better than they did. Flip, I just have a couple more questions for you before we wrap up here. But if you could indulge me for just a moment, one of my moderators has just told me some really tragic news, and if it's true, if we could just take a moment here. Fiona, who's a dear friend of the program, also known as White Zulu because she grew up in KZN and was pretty much raised by Zulus growing up, apparently has passed away today.
Oh, I'm very sorry to hear that.
So if we could just have you and I just a moment of silence out of respect for her passing, if you don't mind, if you can indulge me. Thank you, Flip. I appreciate that. So back to this topic. What's particularly horrific to me is the concept of collective guilt. After the Second World War, the German society went through a period of collective guilt, and those who had no role in fascism or the Second World War carried that collective guilt into about the year 2000. It wasn't until after the unification of the Middle Germany, it's not East Germany, it's Middle Germany, Middle Deutschland, with the West. It wasn't until then that we began to start to move away from collective guilt. But still, you have things like Mein Kampf are illegal. You can't have that in Germany. And anyone who says anything that might offend the government is labeled a fascist, which is a dangerous label. But the concept of collective guilt, I find repulsive and reprehensible. If you had nothing to do with an act, you should not be considered guilty of it. This collective guilt is something that socialists and communists love to apply to people. Look what the Soviets did to kulaks, to Ukrainian peasants during the 30s, and to others. And the Chinese did during the Cultural Revolution, where they murdered 30 or 40 million Chinese. But today, there's a sense, in my view, that there's this effort to push collective guilt on white South Africans in general, but Afrikaners in particular. And the irony is that 60% of Afrikaners and whites were born after apartheid ended, during the entirety of ANC rule. And blaming them for a system that the ANC has established with 145 race-based laws and with privilege for people through patronage that benefit people based on their skin pigmentation. One of the reasons why Starlink won't apply for a license in South Africa, and I don't blame them. I mean, it seems to me to be particularly immoral and unjust to blame white South Africans who had nothing to do with it. I mean, folks of your generation, my generation, were around during apartheid. We may not have played a role in it. But, I mean, if you're going to blame someone, I suppose you could kind of blame us, but even that's not necessarily legitimate. But blaming a 23-year-old or a 30-year-old for what happened and punishing them by restricting the number of people who can advance up the management ranks in a private corporation to just 4% white males, I mean, that's particularly promiscuous and I think just morally bankrupt. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, if I can quote Thomas Sowell, you've said that it is very unfair to blame certain people for what happened allegedly before they were born, while you don't hold people responsible for what they are doing today. And that is the problem of the ANC. The worse they govern, the more people are unemployed and so on, and they blame the past. And we have said repeatedly to them, you can't complain, you can't blame young people, like you have said, what happened before they were born, but you do not take responsibility for what you're doing now. And, even Viktor Frankl, he was in a Nazi concentration camp. He said there's no such thing as collective, guilt. But the ANC used that as a tool to keep people in line, to keep people, for example, they deny that there's race laws in South Africa, even if it is under statute books, So because they say, no, the whole idea is to is to address the injustices of the past. But if you look at the statistics, affirmative action was developed as a method to protect a minority and in a growing economy. But South Africa is trying to use, the ANC is trying to use affirmative action, race-based laws to uplift a majority in a shrinking economy. I mean, that is impossible. If you look at the results, that is why we have the highest unemployment figures in the world, because you chase away, you export your job creators and your high net taxpayers. That is what the ANC do. But I can assure you, not only their own supporters believe them anymore. They know that trains were running on time before the ANC took power. They know it was cheap and reliable and safe and clean, and they know what's happening now. They know crime is now, out of control. Many people suffer in the black townships. I can tell you, if the trains do not work properly, they must use very expensive taxis and so on. So their own supporters bears the brunt of the bad government at this stage. But I totally agree with you. They try to blame Afrikaners and whites in general in order to try to keep us into line.
Well, in the past, Flip, we've seen publicly shown in the media frequently where the government, in particular the president, has spoken to AfriForum, especially, but also to Solidarity about issues. I mean, when they're gazetting some of these laws, I mean, it may be perfunctory, maybe they talk to you or listen to you, but they don't really listen. But we've seen that since these events unfolded with President Trump halting foreign aid to South Africa and then issuing an executive order in which he actually also offered refugee status to South Africans. Have Solidarity and AfriForum still had access to the presidency and to senior members of the government, any ministers, or are you kind of being pushed to the wilderness because of these bogus treason charges or allegations?
Yeah, that is a problem. It is very difficult for us to get access to the South African government because they blame us for high treason. They blame us for the problems with the United States. They blame us for the statements of President Trump. So they really blame us for basically everything that goes wrong, in the country. And my biggest problem with them is that their memory of the past are stronger than their vision of the future. They try to drive the South African car by looking in the rearview mirror instead of looking through the front window. And that is why we have the results that we see all around us. There are some improvements in the country. We have seen that the private sector, the government are forced to work with the private sector in order to improve the electricity, in order to improve the railway infrastructure, the harbors and so on. And we see small-scale improvements, and we are very glad about that. For example, the private sector, everyone who can afford that use solar in South Africa. I mean, it's basically 2 power stations that people have put up themselves because it's a lot of sunshine in South Africa, and that relieves the pressure on our national electricity supplier. But luckily, we have now competent management there at Eskom. They seem to improve the electricity supply in South Africa. The biggest problem now is the municipalities, because in all ANC-controlled municipalities, you have the collapse of infrastructure. So Eskom can generate the power, but you have to distribute it to everyone's home. And now you have the collapse of many municipalities, including, like Pretoria, like Johannesburg, and so on. So it becomes even more difficult and to have reliable electricity and reliable clean drinking water in your home.
Well, it's not just that. This idiotic concept of dividing Eskom into three companies, a generation, a distribution, and the other one, it doesn't make any sense. You have to be vertically integrated in order to deliver electricity. You can't rely on another company, and all that does is create the opportunity for more boards, more directors, more managers, and more patronage. And that's kind of where it seems to go. They don't seem to learn. It's very frustrating. But you started to indicate there. If we go back to '94, there were positive developments. I mean, they may not be lovely houses, but there were eventually 1 million RDP houses built. It took a lot longer than the 5 years they promised. And they don't give land tenure to the people that have it and hand the houses over. They still retain state control, which is stupid, but that's dead capital. The people can't use that capital to go to a bank to borrow money to start a spaza shop or a tuck shop or to buy something or to build something. So but that happened. Also, we had a lot of places were electrified that were never previously electrified, that were neglected in the past. But the upshot of that is that many of those people don't pay anything for electricity. Another burden on a system. So you expand the grid, but you don't get the people to pay, right?
Yeah, but the problem is the ANC have make political promises that it is impossible for the economy. Electricity for free, municipal services for free. You can get education for free, even university. You can study for free, and so on. You don't have to pay the loan back, and so on and so on. And I mean, it is just not, for an economy like South Africa in the past, 2 decades, we have grown about good case scenario 1% a year, more or less. Yeah, and the population growth are much faster. So it is just not that they make political promises that make no economic sense. It's not possible.
Well, in fact, this year, if you look at GDP growth for the 10 years of presidents, this is the worst performing economy. Cyril Ramaphosa, when he leaves office, will likely leave the office with an average of about 1% or less in GDP, which is less than inflation, less than population growth on an annualized basis. Basically, South Africa's economy has shrunk under Cyril Ramaphosa, who came to office with all the fake Ramaphoria that all these people, I didn't fall for that. You come back and watch my comments in 2018. I said they have a chance. They have a chance now, but they got to be serious. And obviously it wasn't serious. It's really sad to see that it's basically, the left likes to talk about progressivism, but South Africa is regressing. It's reverting to a state. There used to be 18 ferrochrome smelters in South Africa. There's one left, and it's about to close. So you can't even make stainless steel. You're going to have to import it from China or somewhere like that, because Chinese have flooded the marketplace and because of the cost of electricity from Eskom. And then, of course, the rails are shut down, so they can't even bring coal down to the stations. The list goes on. And by the way, you said Eskom's performing better. But I think part of that's not just the minister, Ramakopa, who seems to be competent among the few members of government that are competent, but also now they're no longer burning painted rocks at the coal-fired power stations. Now they're actually burning coal. They stopped buying painted rocks from these BE companies. You can't make this stuff up. In Port Elizabeth, Flip, when Ronaldo Jos was a member of the council there, he took me around his ward, which is on the beach, lovely spot, and he showed me all the light poles from the beach. They lighted at night. They're all cut down. Someone took a metal saw and cut them all down. I said, cable thieves? He says, no, the tender guys who want to replace the lights. So they have people go around at night to cut down perfectly good lights at 19,000 Rand per light, and they cut dozens of them down. So now the city has to replace those at 20,000 Rand a piece. And it's just a racket. It's a scam. You can't have a country like this. That's absolutely insane. You can't build anything. And until this lawlessness, the construction industry mafia, the taxi industry mafia brought to bear, I don't know that South Africa has a future. Never mind the politics. Just those things alone, I think, are sad.
Yeah, no, of course. I mean, if you can't get crime and corruption, if you can't, clean out the house, you will never, grow your economy. I mean, with this systemic kind of industrial scale corruption in the country, it is our biggest crisis, and that is why even at government level, they now talk about the danger of the deindustrialization of South Africa. And many times they blame the private sector that they do not invest, but you can't invest if you're not sure that the criminal justice system will protect you and protect your property and protect your employees and so on. So that is why it's very important for us that the rule of law must be restored, and that is why we have to make court cases, and why our neighborhood watches try to cooperate with the police where possible, to try and keep your neighborhoods, I won't say safe, but even, only safer. But yeah, we try our best to work with any constructive partner in order to keep the country from collapsing.
Well, Flip, not to puff up the solidarity movement, but just to talk facts here. I'm going to spit some facts out here. I'm not aware of any new tertiary education institutions having been built in recent history, except Soltech, built on time, under budget, and delivered a fantastic campus there in Centurion, as well as Academia is a university built, and this is built under the solidarity movement, and it's fascinating to see that AfriForum and Solidarity have embraced this concept of self-bestuur. I know I probably pronounce it incorrectly, Afrikaans, but but this self-reliance, I guess, would be a good way to say it in English. Self-starting. You're not a government, but you're doing things in the absence of government services. AfriForum provides security services by patrolling neighborhoods, and I've gone on these patrols in Zeros with them. And just really quickly, not to spend too much more time on this because we're gonna have to wrap up shortly because I know you've got other things you got to take care of. But when I did the patrols with AfriForum in Zeros, I had no preconceived notion of what they're doing. I'm a military guy. I mean, trust me, I know how to do patrols. I sort of do that a lot, especially in combat. But the point here is that I went. They had a pre-mission brief, and then they went through radio checks, and they did the sort of things military and police would do when they go out. And they went out, and the thing that I didn't prejudge was where were they going to go? Well, they went to the neighborhoods in Zeros that are primarily white. They also went to in the township where it's primarily black, where Tswana live. And then, much to my chagrin, having been to Zeros probably about 350 times over the course of my life, because I used to live in Botswana, I didn't know there was an Indian part of Zeros. I discovered that with AfriForum. We drove through the Indian neighborhood. They made no distinction between who lived where. They simply tried to help all South Africans. Now, again, I'm not trying to puff up solidarity, but with the exception of the fact that Soltech and Academia are focused on Afrikaans language speakers, but they're not exclusively white. I've seen coloreds at Soltech that have gone there, but it's for a cultural community. So, I mean, you are doing things in the absence of the state where the state has failed. And that's a huge burden, but that's all done with member contributions and with resources you raise on your own. Or are you getting state assistance?
No. We get no state assistance, and that is our biggest challenge, is to provide state services without state income. So we have a welfare organization. We help the deserving poor all over the country. Because of all those race laws, we have to help Afrikaans kids with education. We help more than 500 Afrikaans schools. We have more than 7,000 students and so on at our different campuses. So we this January we will start to build a new campus for Academia. It is one of the largest construction projects in the country. We will start it, like I said, in January. And that is our biggest challenge. It's not a joke to provide state services without state income in a country where the government govern against you, and where many functions of the state are collapsing. But we believe we are builders. We believe in self-help. We believe in what we call in Afrikaans help mekaar, help each other. And that is centuries-old principles of Afrikaner self-reliance. And we fall back on our traditional culture. And of course, you modernize it, but you still keep that. You keep your roots and you build on that.
Well, one last question, and then I'll give you a chance to have the final word from your side to talk about the op-ed and where you stand and that sort of thing. But I would be remiss if I didn't ask this question, and that is, when AfriForum and Solidarity came to the States and we met and we did the interview, a lot of South Africans, Afrikaners in particular, said they don't speak for me. Well, I I said, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, that's why I want your input on this. I said that AfriForum wasn't trying to speak for the entire country. It was speaking for its members, on behalf of its members. And some of its members didn't agree with that, but I think that you actually saw a surge in membership at AfriForum. I don't know about Solidarity because it's an umbrella organization, how you join that, but yeah. So this situation, did you get a lot of pushback, or in the end, did this result in more relationship and more affinity for your organizations?
No, from the Afrikaner community, we get a lot of support. I can tell you that, a lot of support. We don't pretend to speak on for everyone, but of course, if you are speaking for property rights, I believe it is in the interest of everyone in the country, black and white. But we get a lot of support from the Afrikaner community and from many other people, because they are also sick and tired of the corruption and the mismanagement of the ANC.
Well, thank you so much for that. I give my guests a chance to have a final word here or say. I do that all the time, and I want to thank you, Bye Donkey, for your time. I appreciate it, and answering these questions in response to the op-ed that you had published in News 24. We could talk for hours, but you have work to do, and I've got another interview coming up. So I'm going to give you a chance here to share any thoughts you might have with the audience, and appreciate your time. So the floor is yours, sir.
Yeah, I must say that Afrikaners didn't come to South Africa as Afrikaners. We became Afrikaners in South Africa. We named ourselves after the continent, the only European group that did that. We named our language after the continent, many of our companies and our organizations after the continent. So we are Afrikaners, we are Westerners, but we are also, Africans. And the overwhelming majority of Afrikaners want to stay here and want to contribute towards the welfare of the country and all its people. And that is why we try to create the conditions that Afrikaners can stay in South Africa safe and prosperous and free. Thank you very much.
Well, Flip, thank you very much. I do appreciate that. And that kind of touches at the end there sort of in an indirect way on the refugee issue. But we'll save that for another time to chat with you about that and your position on that. But people know I talk a lot about that. But thank you very much for that. I appreciate your time. And I wish you, well, it's late afternoon now, so enjoy the rest of your evening and be safe going home. All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chris. All the best for you also. Thank you very much.
All right. Bye-bye. All right, folks, while Flip drops off there, I'll go ahead and wrap this one up, and then he's gone. Boy, he's a pro, man. He was off like that. Well done. So thank you for tuning in. Don't forget, we've got coming up here shortly, in about an hour, we're going to have another stream that will be with Ernst van Zyl. Ernst van Zyl will be joining us to talk about a huge, explosive report coming out today from AfriForum. Speaking of AfriForum, so that's coming up here shortly. So there'll be about an hour break between. I'm going to sit down and try to confirm what's going on with Fiona, that's her passing, and then if so, I'll probably do a short tribute video to her. She's a dedicated viewer of the program for a long time. Someone took abuse from another platform and then found a home here. So thank you for that. Thanks to everybody who tuned in. I appreciate being here, and I hope that you show up for the conversation with Ernst van Zyl. So thank you. You guys will be back here shortly on the program, and thank you very much, guys. We'll appreciate it. We'll see you shortly. I'm sorry, I'm a little bit out of sorts here hearing about Fiona. That's not shocking news, but sad news to hear. So thank you all so much.